Hello, this is the My Artifact episode number 3709. Today's date is November 18, 2025. It's been almost like a morning at 8:05 a.m. It's like really cold in here. Temperature is almost like a 13 degrees Celsius at this moment. AQI is 131. Okay, yeah, a little bit polluted, but that is fine. Oh boy, like it's like really cold. Okay, yeah. Whatever. What I'm trying to tell you, let's just jump into the question. Okay. Yeah. Right. Where is this question? Okay. Where is this question? Sorry. Okay. What if the identity was fluid and sheer? Okay, that's a really good question. Oh yeah. First of all, is that what exactly is this question, and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force you to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality, it kind of like a somebody it like basically is this thing. When I try to construct that reality, I'm kind of like utilizing my information and knowledge that I've been through and everything. And when I utilize that information and knowledge to kind of like construct that reality, somehow it felt really good. Somehow it felt like knowledgeable. I don't know how I supposed to explain, but it felt good. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It is just my opinion. It's raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I'm saying. It is just kind of like a simply opinion, and opinion are subjective. Alright. Now proceed further. Now question is that what if identity was fluid and sheer? Now regarding about this question, the question is a bit more tricky to understand. Okay, yeah. It's not really tricky, but it's like that na ki it's very hard to consume. Okay, like some of the information in the world are kind of like very hard to consume. Like we are not believe in that particular stuff. Example, like do you believe in ghost? The people who are kind of like believe in ghost, those people are already believe in ghost. The people who don't really believe in ghost, they will not gonna believe that. Like for me, I will not consider as a ghost is a kind of like a real thing. Okay, it's just kind of like some imaginary factor that people kind of like some imagine, and that's it. And this is what I kind of like been through. Like this is what I kind of like some information has kind of like passed through in my body, passed through my surrounding and things like that. And so as that's kind of like a thing that key ghost is not real. So this is kind of like a I born with it. This kind of like a thought process I born with it. Okay, yeah. So same thing happened with you too. Same thing happened with every person has a kind of like a different person, different perspective, their opinion and things like that. Okay, yeah. Some people believe in ghosts, some people did not. Some people believe in aliens, some people did not. So it is kind of like their personality, and because of their personality, kind of like a shape the society to the kind of like a better way. Because is that thing, basically is this thing what we kind of like consider as a someone flaws is considered to be someone kind of like a really good. Example, if I'm not believing ghosts, then probably someone kind of like a somebody. If I'm not believing ghost and someone kind of like a somebody believe in ghost, okay, yeah. So probably I would kind of like create a debate with that particular person that no, like this is this thing that ghost does not exist. Then the person who has kind of like a believe in ghost, that particular person has a responsibility to kind of like a prove me to kind of like a somebody ghost is actually a real thing. So he would try to kind of like a figure it out a way to kind of like a somebody understanding that ghost is kind of like somebody real and things like that. Now basically it's not about the kind of like a ghost is real or not, but it's about that because of he was trying to improve me, he was trying to prove me, he was kind of like somebody try to understand me, or he was trying to kind of like prove me regarding about how wrong am I. Now this is called kind of like somebody growth is actually happened. Growth is not actually happen is because of kind of like somebody is this thing that came someone kind of like somebody not approve and this like that is kind of like a happen is because of that we always try to prove ourselves to kind of like somebody what we can do. Okay, yeah. And that should kind of like somebody people's growth and society's actually growth is actually happen. Okay, yeah. And this is where kind of like somebody humanity is kind of like push ourselves to be a little bit better. So for this thing, it's really essential to understand that people, different set of people have different set of mindset, and different set of people have different mindset. They are kind of like prove them they are kind of like somebody right and things like that. And this is where kind of like something that growth is actually happen. Now regarding about the question says that for this particular context we need to kind of like somebody make sure that a perspective is kind of like a different than each other. Okay, we are kind of like born with it, we are kind of like believe with it, and we are kind of like believe some sort of fact, and some sort of believe some sort of fact that we don't really believe that. And that is true, by the way. This is our kind of, this is our identity, this is our kind of like simply represent ourselves, that what we can do and what we can't. And this is what kind of like somewhat something better for us, okay, yeah, to kind of like simply kind of like something different than each other. And this is somewhat something really good, okay, yeah. Now in this particular context, okay, yeah, the question is actually says that what if we could kind of like simply share our identity, or kind of like simply sharing our memories, or kind of like simply is this thing, then probably what is actually define you, okay, yeah, because definition of you is kind of like completely changed, because who you are is kind of like simply who you are is like the what you kind of like been through, what is your, what is actually your belief, facts, information, and everything. Okay, so this is what kind of like simply your identity. Your identity, not just your name. Your identity is kind of like a represent your personality, your action, your kind of like simply the way that you talk to the people, the way that you knowledge that you consume, and this is what you have. Okay, and this is kind of like a much more better way. But in this reality, if the identity and kind of like memories would be shared, then there is a question is actually arise then who we are, okay, and what we are. Like basically this thing, we are shifting the bodies from day to day. Like basically today I'm kind of like a boy, next day I would kind of like a girl, next day I would kind of like become third person, next day I would be kind of like a very different person, okay, yeah. And another thing is that my identity would be shared, so I'm kind of like sharing my identity and kind of like a memories to someone else, and I don't really knew him. And if such thing is gonna happen, then probably it would kind of like create a chaos, okay, yeah. Because let me tell you one thing, who is exactly you? Example is this thing, the person who killed someone else, and next day he would kind of like switch the body to someone else, then probably who is that particular person who killed that particular person? It's very hard to understand who is kind of like kill that particular person, okay, yeah. Because let me tell you one thing, our identity represent our physicalness, okay, yeah. Who do I look, what kind of like a simply costume that I wear, and things and that, okay, yeah. It's not represented by soul. We are not kind of like a somebody mentioned by name by her soul, because soul is not actually exist. Soul is a part of our internal body organ, and kind of like a things that we kind of like a scientists are kind of like associated with that factor, that soul is a part of our body. But if in this reality that kind of like a somebody is this thing that our soul is kind of like a transfer from one to another, then it's very hard to understand who we are and what we are. Now basically our entire system will gonna collapse, because our entire system is kind of like a based on make ourselves much better. Now the question is actually arise, who is actually ourselves, who is actually we, or who is actually I? That is kind of like a very big question actually arise, okay, yeah. Because almost that you are kind of like every day you are kind of like sharing your identity, then probably you just kind of like somebody just, I don't know what you are, okay, yeah. And probably if I'm kind of like try to imagine these consequences, it's kind of like somebody very hard to believe for me, okay, yeah. Because from the every possible perspective, it's kind of like somebody giving me at the end of chaos and things like that, because it's not possible. It's definitely not gonna possible. The humanity will not gonna grow. The kind of like simply the human civilization will not gonna grow. Human civilization will kind of like simply die very instantly at the beginning of this kind of like a time. If the kind of like simply the humanity would kind of like share the kind of like some identity every single day, this is like a really fucked up thing, okay, yeah. So this is my just opinion, okay, yeah. By the way, I'm kind of like somebody doing it really fast. I'm kind of like ending my artifact episode as fast as I can, because I'm fucking really cold, okay, yeah. And I don't wanted to continue, but I wanted to continue, yeah. Let's just talk about this particular shit. I don't know, yeah. It's just like some of the topic are kind of like a bit more kind of like a somebody that, like, how do I supposed to explain this thing? Yeah, like what if kind of like some things happen? What if kind of like we are sharing this particular fact, particular identity? Then what would be that particular world? Dude, it's very hard to believe. It's very hard to construct that reality. Why? Because of that key, like there are multiple problems that will gonna come. Okay, yeah. Like basically this thing, our entire system is kind of like a rely on us, rely on me, rely on kind of like somebody I, rely on kind of like somebody is this thing that key we are kind of like different than each other, because we are kind of like somebody different. We are kind of like a somebody different person. Okay, every person kind of like a very different person. Like the way that I'm thinking, the way that you think is kind of like completely wrong, and that is good. That is kind of like somebody really essential for kind of like somebody every possible way. If the kind of like somebody humanity will kind of like switch the kind of like identity and share the memories and things and that, how probably that would be kind of like a really good, that the secrets would not kind of like somebody share. Okay, secrets is not meant to be like secret is not even exist. Okay, yeah, everyone know what exactly they've been through and everything. But still is this thing that keep probably the differences is kind of like something essential for kind of like a creating growth. And if there is no differences, there is no growth. So yeah, even if there is a people who kind of like have little bit differences, but probably is this thing that they might have kind of like a things that okay, this person has a kind of like a simply not, he kind of like against me yesterday and today he just kind of like be with me. So where is that person go? Okay, yeah. So it's kind of like a things that now another thing is that if this kind of like a things would kind of like something exist, then probably we have to kind of like a simply give the kind of like a simply a trademark or kind of like a simply identity new way that we should supposed to be doing. Like basically this thing right now, my name is Saurabh Autare. I'm born in 2nd of September 1993. This is my kind of like a simply identity that I carry through in my entire lifetime. Okay, yeah. But in this particular context, in this particular reality, if we kind of consider that our identity is kind of like a share, then probably is this thing we might consider that today my name is Saurabh Autare. Tomorrow I might kind of like a name as something really different. Next day I would kind of like a very different person. So probably what should I supposed to do? I have kind of like simply catalog the every single day that who am I, and kind of like share that catalog to the kind of like a society or to the system, to the government or things like that. So basically today my name is this, tomorrow my name would be something different, day after tomorrow might be name is kind of something very different, also with the kind of like a some time and date and where it should supposed to be. So this is where it is. Also another thing is that now if the kind of like a soul is kind of like a transfer from one country to another country, let's just say today I'm in India, tomorrow I might give into the kind of like a Nigeria, then probably people who are kind of like speaking Arabic or something like that. So how do I supposed to speak their language? Okay, so probably is this thing, if we are kind of like sharing the identity, probably we would have kind of like some very common language to the rest of the world. Okay, only one language that everyone understands. Okay, this would kind of like really good, but probably is this thing that the cultural thing is kind of like simply gone. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that culture and kind of like simply the way that we think about our culture is kind of like simply culture and religious will also will gonna go on, because everything will gonna kind of like simply same is that everyone kind of like believe in one god or one kind of like simply culture and things like that, because we are kind of like sharing identity every single time. So that's why we are kind of like simply that we would kind of like simply the pray only one god and that's it. Okay, we would have not have that kind of like multiple religious and things like that. Okay, yeah. Also with the culture too. Okay, another thing is that now we would have kind of like the same language, we would have kind of like same religions, we would have kind of like a same that kind of like assembly the understanding the way that we living the life. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that also we need to kind of like assembly create a kind of like a particular system that we should supposed to be track our soul where it should supposed to be. Okay, yeah. Like basically is this thing, if we are kind of like went to sleep and our soul is kind of like a transfer from one body to another body, so probably we need to kind of like create a system that kind of like trap the soul at somewhere else. Okay, or kind of like assembly, if the kind of like a soul somebody soul is kind of like a release from our body and kind of like assembly went into another kind of like a body, so we would have to figure it out that soul is kind of like have specific number, and that specific number is kind of like somebody became your identity. This is our kind of like somebody became our memory and things like that. Okay, so this would be kind of like something happened. It's kind of like somebody is this thing that we are became not the kind of like somebody a car, we are kind of like become a driver. Okay, we are kind of like driving this car for kind of like somebody this day, and tomorrow we will kind of like switch the car to someone else. Okay, yeah. So this is where it where it's kind of like something happen. We always kind of like somebody sharing the car with someone else, and this is kind of like something very big thing is that happens. Some car is kind of like a really good to drive, some car is really not good to drive. Okay, yeah. Some car is kind of like somebody really fluently, really kind of like somebody run on kind of like electric and things like that. Some car is kind of like somebody not able to kind of like drive and things like that. So there is kind of like somebody very fucked up thing happened. Okay, yeah. So there would be kind of like a things. Okay, there is no kind of like a rich and there is no poor. Okay, probably is everything kind of like something same because of that the identity is kind of like something we are sharing. So probably is that holding the kind of like a wealth is kind of like something is not kind of like an option. Is that why do we kind of like holding the wealth? Because today I have wealth, tomorrow I will not have the wealth. Okay, so probably is this thing the everyone kind of like somebody have equal amount of money and kind of like share that money to the kind of like a society and things like that. Already, yeah. Another thing is that probably is this thing, if the one person who has kind of like a somebody invention idea and he wanted to invent some sort of thing, then probably is this thing that he just have to kind of like a somebody write down the every notes that he been through, and probably is this thing he would kind of like share that notes to someone else who is kind of like somebody sharing the body to another person. But it would kind of like somebody create a chaos because of the another person is not really curious about that particular thing. Example is this thing that just say Thomas Edison. If the Thomas Edison is kind of like sharing this body to someone else, then probably what is gonna happen? Talk slow, dude. Talk slow. Oh my god. Talk slow. Talk slow. Okay, don't talk really fast. Okay, just talk slow. Okay, you are talking really, really fast. Oh boy. Okay, so talk slow. Okay, just talk slow. Okay. So if the Thomas Edison talk slow, dude. Okay, dude, I'm really cold in here. I'm really fucking cold. I wanted to end the artifact episode as quickly as possible as I can, so that I would kind of like simply go inside and kind of like simply warm myself. Like basically in outside in the rooftop, I'm kind of like simply fucking cold in here, and probably I'm not gonna kind of explain that thing. So I'm gonna talking really fast and kind of like end this artifact episode quickly as possible as I can. So that's why. Okay, so let me talk fast. Okay, just jump through it. Okay, yeah. Okay, what do you want to do? Okay, let's just say Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison is a kind of like simply the scientist, and he would kind of like a fail almost like 1,000 times to make a bulb. So basically, is this thing the patience and required to kind of like make a bulb? It takes time. Okay, and now basically, if you kind of like share the memory and thoughts with someone else, then probably what is gonna happen that probably he would kind of like fail multiple times, and basically Thomas Edison that we know is kind of like no longer exists because of that. Every single day he was kind of like simply sharing his body to someone else, and this is where kind of like a chaos will gonna happen. Like basically is this thing every single time he just had to start over from kind of like making the bulb, and probably he just fail. Okay, yeah. Also another thing is that now it's just not regarding about just a bulb. It really required kind of like some of the equipment and kind of like a preparation and things like that. So basically is this thing that we are not just kind of like a went to understand the where it should supposed to be soul, where it went. Also another thing is that that soul should supposed to be kind of like a travel kind of like close to nearby, so that we would access the kind of like a lab, so that we would create the bulb quickly as possible. But still is it not going to possible because of that catching the soul or kind of like a tracking the soul is kind of like a far more difficult, because soul is not the physical thing. Soul is a kind of like some of the something. There is this thing that we can't end up saying and things like that. So probably is this thing that Thomas Edison will not create the bulb, so probably rest of the world will not have kind of like some electric bulb and things like that. Okay, another thing is that if the Elon Musk is kind of like somebody the switching body every single time, then probably we would not have the kind of like a Tesla and SpaceX and things like that. Like basically all the innovation is actually happen is kind of like something happen is because of the consistency and effort and kind of like some patience and things like that. Now basically if everyone try to kind of like somebody the switching the body every single time, then probably what is going to happen that probably we are actually focus on kind of like some innovation kind of like something happening just one day and that's it. Okay, like we are actually focused on just a temporary solution, that's it. And this is what kind of like create a chaos, because our human generation will not gonna kind of like somebody evolve with a kind of like somebody just a normal thing. We are kind of like a focus on kind of like what is actually best for us, and what is actually kind of like something that best of us is kind of like come from the kind of a consistent effort and things like that. Like if I'm trying to make a YouTube video, if I wanted to kind of like somebody make sure that I'm kind of like somebody became a content creator, it took me almost like a 5 year to understand the YouTube and things like that. Every time kind of like somebody consume information, understanding knowledge and how it kind of like went through, it kind of like it takes time. And obviously we don't really have time, because every single day we are kind of like switching the body, and this would kind of like create a chaos, and this would kind of like somebody the innovation will not gonna happen. So that will gonna happen that probably we will not gonna evolve, and we will not gonna kind of like somebody the develop that much. Also another thing is that we were still living in kind of like somebody the cave, and kind of like we still kind of like hunting and gathering. Okay, yeah, because still is this thing that the single innovation will not gonna happen, and probably is this thing the human body is not able to kind of like somebody survive that for long. Because let me tell you one thing, human body is not able to run that faster. We would not can fly, we would not have that much first for and things like that. So probably is this thing in the wilderness, probably we would not gonna survive, because other animal, like let's just say that I have kind of like a skills to kind of like hunting skills, but probably next day I would not have that kind of hunting skill, because I kind of like switch my body and things like that. So probably is this thing that now how do I supposed to kind of like prevent my body from the wilderness and things like that. Another thing is that now love and kind of like share would kind of like some chaos. Like basically is this thing, who do you supposed to call as a love, who do you supposed to kind of like somebody the relationship, this will not gonna exist, because of that we are kind of like considered as a kind of like some part of us, and we were kind of like a focus on kind of like building the society. But still is this thing we won't be able to do that thing, because we are kind of like sharing the body every single time, and this will kind of like create a chaos. Okay, yeah, love is not gonna exist, and kind of like respect will not gonna exist, and we are just kind of like somebody just holding this car for just today, and kind of like tomorrow I will kind of like pass this car to someone else, and this is where kind of like chaos will gonna happen. We are not gonna focus on kind of like the bigger goal. We are actually focused on kind of like a temporary goal that will gonna happen kind of like quickly as possible, and that's it. Okay, yeah. So probably is this thing that innovation will not gonna happen, because of nothing will happen. So basically entire human civilization will gonna die very instantly. Okay, so this is where kind of like the chaos will gonna happen. So that's why kind of like we are not able to kind of like share our identity and things like that. So that's why just talk slow, dude. Talk slow. I don't know why, but every time I'm kind of like getting chill, I'm kind of like talking really fast. Okay, I'm kind of like complete my artifact episode within a kind of like 19 minutes. Okay, so if the kind of like identity fluid and kind of like a share, then this would kind of like create a chaos and things like that. There is no kind of like a possible growth. There is no possible kind of like only the right thing will gonna happen with us, and humanity will kind of like collapse as quickly as possible as it can. So this is my kind of like opinion regarding about the identity is fluid and share. All right, this is it, and thank you.